Hey guys, my name's Steve Smith. I'm a nurse anesthetist from the state of Georgia. I'm a member of the AANA Government Relations Committee, and I'm here today to talk about anesthesiologist assistants, otherwise known as AAs. Currently, there are approximately 1,800 AAs practicing in the United States and 47,000 CRNAs. Even though there are only 1,800 AAs practicing, they are considered as a long-term threat. In Atlanta, for example, there are 8 to 10 big hospitals inside the perimeter area, and in those hospitals it's about 70% AAs and about 30% CRNAs. There are also about 10 AA programs in the country as opposed to about 113 CRNA programs. Each year we graduate about 2,500 CRNAs and the AAs graduate about 200. There are currently 14 states where AAs can practice either by licensure or certification, and then there's also another 4 states where they practice under physician delegation. And they also practice in the District of Columbia. The AA has not taken an official position on AAs, but the State Government Affairs Office has done a wonderful job helping the states out with legislation and regulatory issues. And the ASA, or the American Society of Anesthesiologists, has also supported AAs after years of neutrality. I wanted to give you a little brief history here. In the late 1960s, there were 2 AA programs that came about. One was at Emory University in Atlanta, and the other at Case Western in Ohio. So really for about the next 30 years, up until about 2000, there were just a handful of AAs practicing in the United States and those 2 programs. What happened in 2000 at the end of the Clinton administration, the federal supervision of Medicare Part A was revoked or went away, and so that CRNAs didn't have to practice under physician supervision for the hospital to receive Medicare Part A. And then shortly after that, it changed to opt-out under Bush. But because of that, I believe it really was kind of a thorn in the side of anesthesiologists. And so that's when they started developing some of these programs, and there was an increase in the number of AAs. And the ASA sponsors the commission. They're big sponsors of the AAs. I mean, without the ASA, the AAs wouldn't be about. They sponsored the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs, referred to as CAAHEP. Before AAs can get into anesthesia assistant school, they have to have a minimum of at least a Bachelor's of Arts or Bachelor of Science degree. They may have never held a syringe in their hand in their life. They may have not gone to a hospital or been inside a hospital. They don't have to have any type of health care background, whereas CRNAs have a BSc and 4 years of training in nursing, and then they have to have at least a minimum of 1 year experience in the ICU. And the CAAHEP standards, there's no minimum hours for core courses for AAs, and in fact, 600 cases are recommended for them to graduate with, but it's not a must. They don't have to. And their scope of training is limited. And I want to give you an example of this. They are taught to monitor but not actually administer subarachnoid blocks, epidurals, peripheral nerve blocks, and central venous lines. So there's a big difference there. Their assistants basically is what they are. And they do end up with a master's degree in science. As far as their scope of practices, a practice, like I mentioned before, is extremely limited. They are basically anesthesia assistants. They take care of the patients after things like regional blocks are put in, peripheral nerve blocks and such, but that's really the scope of their practice. As opposed to CRNAs, we practice under the AANA scope of practice, and so our practice, the only way our practice would be limited is on a state level. And we see this a little bit in chronic pain management now, which is a big issue going on. And so there's certain states where your chronic pain management may be limited, but otherwise CRNAs are able to practice to the fullest extent of their education and training. Practice settings, predominantly AAs will practice in the urban areas because that's where most of the anesthesiologists are. And this is a big thing with CRNAs practicing in rural areas because we do not have to practice under the direct supervision of anesthesiologists, and AAs do. So it's a huge difference there. Salary-wise, depending on the practice they're in, if their job description is the same, there is not, and this is according to the AANA, there is not going to be a difference in general between salaries because they're all doing the same thing. And I just wanted to make a little point on this. It's important, and I've seen this the last 30 years being in Atlanta. If you are a CRNA, especially a new graduate, and you want to go to work in an AA environment, you are going to be practicing the same as an AA does. The chances of you doing any regional anesthesia, peripheral nerve blocks, or even administering your own drugs during induction is probably not going to happen. It would be a rare case. So just keep that in mind, and that's a good reason to be fired up about, you know, stopping this. And if we can't stop it regulatory or legislatively, we need to figure out other ways to do it. There's been peer-reviewed studies done but not published by AAs as far as their safety, and there's none out there that have actually been published. Whereas the CRNAs, we've had a multitude of different peer-reviewed studies in prominent journals that say there's no difference between CRNAs delivering anesthesia alone or in combination with anesthesiologists versus anesthesiologists. As far as the AA legal authority to practice under physician delegation, we're seeing this in 4 states. I believe it's Texas, Michigan, New Hampshire, and West Virginia. And so that there's 14 others that practice under licensure and certification, but then there's those 4 states that practice under strictly physician delegation. And there's one state, the state of Louisiana, that strictly prohibits AANA practice. It's actually written into their legislation. An important point I'd like to make as far as the legislation and AAs, and particularly in the last 3 years and last year, there were actually 9 bills in different states concerning AAs and their practice. And unfortunately, this last year in the state of Indiana, the governor signed an AA bill allowing AAs to practice in Indiana beginning in July of this year. What I'd like to do now is summarize the differences between AAs and CRNAs. And the first point I want to make is the nursing background that we have. As I mentioned before, AAs aren't required to have any type of healthcare background. And of course, nurses, you know about nurses and what we do. And that's just a huge difference. I've worked with a ton of AAs in my life, and I can tell you, unless they have like a paramedic background or respiratory therapist background, there's no comparison, and it's really sad. Maybe the most important thing to remember, AAs work solely under the direct supervision of an anesthesiologist. And another important point, AAs cannot bill QZ, so that they are always going to be under the supervision of an anesthesiologist. It's always going to require 2 people to provide care for one person, so it's not going to be cost effective. The cheapest cost effective model possible is to be within 25% of what a CRNA alone can do. So that is a huge deal. The bottom line is we have to beat them in the marketplace. And again, I want to give a quick example. My practice in Atlanta, I have 7 different practices, and these are all office-based type practices. And I'm able to do it because of the laws, and AAs, they can't because they have to practice under the supervision of an anesthesiologist. And these offices aren't going to hire them because they always have to have an anesthesiologist around, and who's going to pay that extra salary? They're not going to do it. So we beat them in the marketplaces. If we can't do it on the legislative and regulatory arena in each state, that's how we beat them. We beat them in the marketplace. Finally, the resources. I want everybody to be familiar with the AA toolkit. There's an AA fact sheet and CR in a AA comparison table, and also the SGA staff. All this information can be found online at aana.com under the SGA link. Thanks a lot, I appreciate it.